It is my pleasure to welcome you here for tonight's lecture by our distinguished speaker, investigative journalist Chris Woods. This lecture is presented on the occasion of the current exhibition at the Kemper Art Museum on view through April 24th, titled To See Without Being Seen, Contemporary Art and Drone Warfare, co-curated by my colleague Meredith Malone and Svea Brauner, a Berlin-based scholar of media theory. The exhibition brings together a range of video, sculpture, installation, photography, and web-based projects that reveal the unique potential of art to further our understanding of and give visual form to modern drone warfare and digital surveillance. Tonight's lecture is intended to extend the discussion of drone warfare, secrecy, technology, and civil liberties as they relate to the increasing presence of drones in the military context. Chris Woods is an award-winning journalist, author, director, and series producer with 25 years of experience in producing investigative reports on conflict and national security issues for both UK-based and international media. Since 2010, he has established himself as one of the leading specialists in the field of armed drones as employed on conventional and irregular battlefields. In 2015, he published Sudden Justice, America's Secret Drone Wars with Oxford University Press, the first book to comprehensively bring together and analyze what is known about the US drone program. In this study, Woods examines the effect of armed drones in modern conflict and their key role on the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as in the US targeted killing program. While the CIA claims that drones are the most precise weapon ever invented, so perfect that civilian casualties can be eliminated, Sudden Justice describes the much more complicated realities of the secret drone war, one in which hundreds of civilians have died, while also raising questions about how it may have jeopardized the wider strategic interests of the US. From 2010 to 13, Woods worked as senior reporter for the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, where among other projects, he created and led a team examining the US's covert war on terror, with investigations into drone casualties in Pakistan and elsewhere. Woods is a winner of the 2013 Martha Gellhorn Journalism Prize and was shortlisted for major awards by the Foreign Press Association and the Press Gazette. A former senior BBC Panorama producer, he has authored several investigations into covert US drone strikes and their true effects. Recent essays include Understanding the Gulf Between Public and US Government Estimates of Civilian Casualties in Covert Drone Strikes, published in Drones and the Future of Armed Conflict, Ethical, Legal, and Strategic Implications. Covert Drone Strikes and the Fiction of Zero Civilian Casualties, published in Precision Strike Warfare and International Intervention, and A Secret in Plain Sight, published in Forensis, The Architecture of Public Truth. Woods currently acts as director of Air Wars, a collaborative, not-for-profit transparency project monitoring the international coalition's war against Daesh in Iraq and Syria, and assessing claims of civilian fatalities. He's also a visiting fellow with the School of Politics and International Relations at Queen Mary College, University of London, and a freelance investigative reporter specializing in conflict issues, particularly in the Middle East, Horn of Africa, and South Asia. His recent reports and features have appeared in The Spectator, New Statesman, Independent, Foreign Policy, Salon, The Guardian, New York Daily News, The Daily Telegraph, and Sunday Times, among others. So now please join me in welcoming Chris Woods.
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming tonight. It's an absolutely lovely evening here in St. Louis, and the temptation to be out in the sunshine, I know, must be really great after that long winter. So thank you very much for coming along. Thanks to our hosts this evening, the Mildred Kemper Museum, and of course Washington University. As Alison said, the book that I published last year, it's a modern history, I suppose, of drone use since 9/11, and more broadly a subject we don't really want to confront as a culture, which is how we treat civilians on the battlefield. And that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about tonight through these slides. The idea is I'm going to talk for about 40-45 minutes and then throw it open to questions. And I'm very happy for questions on anything around drones, remote warfare. It doesn't have to relate to what I'm talking to tonight. I know it's a huge subject, and the talks I give, there are often a lot of questions that people have. The opening image I've got there, the title I went for tonight is America's Secret and Not So Secret Drone Wars. We tend to think of these as secret weapons, and obviously looking at that image, that's a very different kind of image. This is an official US Air Force photograph they issued back in 2006. This is actually Balad Air Force Base in Iraq. This was the height of the Iraqi insurgency. This is the year when more American and Allied soldiers died in Iraq, and also more Iraqis died this year than any other year in that terrible conflict. In the middle of that, the Air Force thought it was a good idea to fly out the Redskins cheerleaders and show them a Predator drone. And it is a surreal image, I think. But at that point, the Air Force didn't have many of these weapons. They were limited. They were trying to get them off the production line as fast as they could. The CIA still had control of most of them. So what we see here is this weird juxtaposition of the public and the private. And even the secret wars America is fighting at the moment with these drones are often being carried out in the public glare. We often know a great deal about these supposedly secret wars. So I thought that would be a useful starting point. Now, I'm trying to see how I'm going to click this forward. There was a keyboard here when I started. No, I think I found it. There we go. So, to see without being seen, contemporary art and drone warfare. I had an opportunity to look at the show today, and it's a really fantastic show. I'm sure all of you have had a chance to look at it. Politicians and journalists, I think, have generally failed us around drone warfare in not really articulating the discomfort many of us feel about these new remote forms of warfare. And I'm not just talking about drones here. I think drones, in a sense, have become a lightning rod around which energy coalesces in order, the way we talk about wars as we currently fight them. Drones have become very important for that. And in the absence of that engagement by politicians and others, I think artists have stepped into that vacuum in a really interesting way. I've been to a number of shows internationally where artists have critiqued and engaged and really asked the awkward questions. And the importance of the show title itself, it really does capture the issue for me of drones. To see without being seen. It also evoked for me one of the most haunting lines that I have in the book, which is from a former Special Forces drone operator by the name of Brandon Bryant. He spoke to a Norwegian filmmaker, Tonje Hessen-Skei. If you haven't seen her wonderful film Drone, it's on Netflix still, definitely worth a look. Brandon describes seeing a wedding in Iraq, that most intimate of family occasions, which he secretly gate crashes from 10,000 feet up with his Predator's drone. This is what Brandon had to say. I remember watching a wedding, and these people are all in a circle, and they're doing like the can-can. They're kicking back and forth, and they're moving in one direction and switch directions, and then they move further in the other direction. And I was fascinated because these were people enjoying themselves. Someone in that wedding was a bad person, but at that moment, they probably weren't thinking about someone they wanted to kill. Now, Brandon's job as a US drone operator at that point was to track that target, and maybe later he would need to kill them. But in the process, he's in an Iraqi wedding. And by the way, at the time of that mission, Brandon told me, he didn't even have a passport. He'd never left the United States physically, and yet he was flying hundreds of hours of missions above Iraq, Afghanistan, and Yemen every month. And Brandon had issues with that, as he described it. We're the ultimate peeping toms. No one's going to catch us. We don't often think of the drone operators as wires, but they are gate-crashing people's lives. It's part of what they do. And I think it brings discomfort with that. So this then is remote warfare, simultaneously intimate and distant, everyday and alien. Armed drones, what are we actually talking about? They used to call them unmanned aircraft. That was the phrase that the military adopted in the early days. That's now been dropped, I think mostly because people were confusing that with robots, with killer robots, autonomous machines that did things without human engagement. You think unmanned suggests the idea of no humans in the loop. In fact, there are lots of men and women who operate armed drones. It's just that none of them are in the aircraft itself. The bulbous bit at the front of the aircraft that you can see where on a conventional aircraft, that's where the pilot would sit, that is full of electronics. Without pilots, your planes are lighter, they can fly further, and also you can take far more risks. You can keep them in the air. If they fall out of the sky, nobody's going to die. The risk to our people is lower. And indeed, a single Reaper drone mission can last 24 hours or longer. So one drone, one mission, 24 hours. And you can have 3 separate crews swapping in on that same mission. So in fact, we're talking usually for a drone mission around 200 military personnel involved. That's everyone from the crews that get the drone up in the air and maintain it, the people who run the drone over that 24-hour mission, bring it back down, but also the intelligence analysts, the hundreds of men and women behind the scenes, again thousands of miles from the battlefield, poring over this live intelligence that the drone is also feeding from these pods that you can see that purple light in the middle there. That's the real heart of an armed drone, is the intelligence equipment. So not unmanned, but remotely piloted, as the Air Force likes to call them today. Now, these satellite-controlled drones have been around for about 2 decades now. Unarmed versions were first used to great effect in Bosnia in the mid-1990s. That's when we first see the appearance of the Predator drone. Where they helped, for example, to uncover mass graves. They gave us options on the battlefield that we didn't have before, but they were still unarmed. And this is a line that actually comes from a once secret Pentagon report praising their role in the Balkans, which took this line from Homer as its opening. There are some poets out there in the Air Force. They keep themselves well hidden. But obviously someone's reading Homer in the Air Force. I've seen the cities of men and understand their thoughts. It's this idea of drones opening up spaces that were previously hidden to us. Yet according to Abe Karam, who's the genius Israeli-American inventor of the Predator drone, he never intended to weaponize this system. It was always meant just for spying. Pressure for that came from the CIA, which in the wake of Al-Qaeda's 1998 attacks on US embassies began looking at ways to assassinate Osama bin Laden. So this is before George W. The last couple of years of Bill Clinton's administration, the CIA starts looking at how to assassinate. In fact, the US government employees were banned from assassinating at that point. But the US was already moving towards this assassination territory, even before George W. and 9/11. And it's the CIA's involvement with armed drones, which today, as we all know, makes them so controversial. Now, it's just past 15 years since the first successful test fire of a missile from a drone. And you can see on this here, there's a date in the top right corner, 23rd of January 2001. So that's 3 days into George W. Bush's presidency. They fired the first missile. Successfully, I got the Pentagon to declassify footage for me. Hadn't been seen before. There have been a couple of videograms from it. And you can see the drone isn't actually in the air here. It's actually lashed to a concrete apron The reason for that is they just didn't know if the wing was going to fall off when they fired the missile. And if it was in the air, they were kind of slightly, worried that it would, well, wherever it's going to land, it's not a good idea. So they lash it to this concrete apron. They put a Hellfire missile, which is actually an anti-tank missile, under the wing, and they fire it.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, fire. Item away. +5.
So there you go. That's the historic moment when we entered drone warfare age, the moment that they fired that first missile. As we know, the horrors of 9/11 intervened in that CIA plot to assassinate Osama bin Laden prior to 9/11. Didn't happen. He wouldn't be killed for many years. Instead, that same drone we just seen lashed to the apron was used, it became the first drone in history to fire a weapon in anger. About 6 months later, on the opening night of the air war in Afghanistan, so the war to rid Afghanistan of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban, late 2001. That is that drone again. You can see it there hanging in the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. Very historic aircraft, and the Smithsonian quite rightly have got it as one of the centerpieces of their collection. It was a pretty disastrous opening intervention by a new weapon. So what happened was that opening night of the air war in Afghanistan, October 2001, hundreds and hundreds of American aircraft were brought in from all over the globe to carry out precision strikes, targeted strikes, take out Afghanistan's anti-aircraft, take out key installations, and so on and so on. There was one aircraft that the two generals in charge of the campaign didn't have control of that night, and that was this one. The CIA's drone had a missile under its wing. It was flying over Kandahar. And the Air Force knew where Mullah Omar was. Mullah Omar was the head of the entire Taliban. They had the opportunity to kill him in the opening moments of the war. It would have been a significant strategic blow to the enemy. Unfortunately, the CIA decided that was the perfect moment for them to test their new weapon, which had never been fired in anger on the battlefield before. And they botched it. Working with CENTCOM, the decision was taken without even consulting these two generals to fire the missile. Didn't hit its target. Mullah Omar escaped, and he died peacefully in his bed 14 years later. So not exactly an auspicious beginning for armed drones. And I think time and time again, when we look at the Predator, the Reaper, the CIA's involvement and so on, it's intelligence agencies rather than militaries which are driving the strategy, devising the tactics, and calling the shots. And I'm not convinced that's a good thing, having spent many years looking at this. The Predator remained exclusively in the hands of the CIA for the next 3 years. So between 2001 and 2004, every armed Predator America had was owned by the CIA. The regular US Air Force didn't get its first armed drones until about halfway through 2004. And that's exactly the year that the US drone killing business, as we understand it today, really gets started. That individual with his head turned there in the centre is a man called Hakimullah Massoud, an absolutely murderous Pakistan Taliban leader who was actually killed a couple of years ago by a CIA drone strike. The title there is an interesting one, Hunting the Enemy in a Post-Clausewitzian World. We forget what a huge shift it was when these targeted killings first began. Clausewitz is important because he has informed military doctrine, not just US military doctrine, but international military doctrine, for more than a century now. Clausewitz basically created military philosophy about the idea of wars between nation states. and that wars are consensual affairs between nation states. Well, this was a comment that one of the Air Force generals I spoke to for the book made to me when I said, well, you know, when the CIA begins bombing in Pakistan, it's a country it's not at war in. And often there wasn't consent from the government involved. And the general said to me, well, you have to understand we're living in a post-Clausewitzian world. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, if a country objects to your carrying out missions within its borders, that's fine. If there's no declared conflict there, we're still okay to fire. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges of the war on terror, really. We're 15 years into that war now. It continues to morph and change, and you know, other conflicts have merged into it now. But the old idea of conflicts being delineated by time and space seem to have disappeared. And drones have been part of that process. So, 2004, the CIA begins these strikes in Pakistan, mostly with the collusion of the government there. Working with the Pakistanis, the CIA, FBI, and NSA had all but destroyed Al-Qaeda in Pakistan's cities. They did a very good job of that. So what Al-Qaeda did was retreat back to that old sanctuary, the very remote areas of Pakistan, the tribal areas, where indeed their precursors had worked with the CIA the decade before during the Russian occupation of Afghanistan, and Russia had never been able to get to them in those tribal areas. What Al-Qaeda didn't understand is that the drones had changed everything. There was now almost nowhere that the United States couldn't reach militarily. The only impediment was the rule of law, if you like, the rule of law international. This is a quote. I'm going to jump around a little bit on the timeline here. It's a great cartoon, and I do think that sums up Obama's dilemma, if you like. He would like to see himself as a man of peace, and yet he has overseen this extraordinary expansion in these secret wars, and then the drone strikes. Great cartoon there. But a comment from Obama, I think it's really interesting. This is Obama's justification for the drone wars, and we need to listen to it. I think our actions are effective. Don't take my word for it. Dozens of highly skilled Al-Qaeda commanders, trainers, bomb makers, operatives have been taken off the battlefield. Plots have been disrupted that would have targeted international aviation, US transit systems, European cities, the troops in Afghanistan. Simply put, these strikes have saved lives, and that's the rationale for these secret wars. And I think it has some validity. You know, America's enemies really have been put down, at least in Pakistan. Al-Qaeda was destroyed there, mostly through drones, but also the intelligence efforts that went in there. But in the words of one former CIA analyst, Robert Grenier, are we simply mowing the grass here by killing hundreds, thousands of alleged terrorists every year, only for more and more of them to take their place? After all, today, with terror attacks in Europe on the rise, with Al-Qaeda and ISIL rampant in the Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, can we really say that drones have made us safer? And it turns out that the CIA itself anticipated this dilemma from the very beginning. For the book, I got plenty of former military and intelligence officials to talk to me. I can't name this individual. I can describe them as a former high-ranking US counter-terrorism official with detailed knowledge of the drone program. Pretty high up, very knowledgeable. And this is what this person told me, and I think this is really interesting. When we're convincing the president, and this is Bush, that they wanted to expand the drone program in Pakistan in 2008, when we're convincing the president to go, he has to go more aggressively in the first half of 2008, we know there are second-order effects and third-order effects. Second-order effect is it alienates allies because no one else agrees with our legal theory. The US was pretty much alone in thinking these strikes were lawful. The third-order effect, in some sense, it helps Al-Qaeda recruit. So the US always knew it had a limited window here to get in, kill the bad guys, before these second and third order effects started to become a problem. And those second and third order effects, the one they are most sensitive around, and the one that carried the most risk, was the killing of civilians. It's the one that the public are most uncomfortable about with these wars, and quite rightly. This is a haunting picture taken in Yemen by a friend of mine, Vivian Salama. She's now Associated Press's bureau chief in Baghdad. She took this photo on assignment for Rolling Stone a couple of years back. And here, mother and daughter are mourning the death of a teacher, Ali Saleh al-Kawili, had the misfortune to get into a car one day, hitch a lift down to the village with 2 Al-Qaeda suspects. The CIA took out the car, and he died. A couple of months back, in fact a year back now, you probably remember President Obama stood up and acknowledged, took it on the chin for the accidental CIA slaying of Warren Weinstein in a CIA drone strike in Pakistan. He apologized to the family for the killing of Mr. Weinstein and his Italian co-captor. And I think that was a good thing. But to this day, it remains the absolute exception. In 15 years of secret drone strikes, where militant groups believe hundreds of civilians like Mr. Al-Kawili have died, alongside thousands of terror suspects, not one of those civilian deaths has been formally acknowledged, not one apology has ever been issued by the United States. What kind of message is it where we never acknowledge or apologize for the innocents we kill, no matter how noble our war aims? And innocents have died, whatever the White House and CIA claim. Here's just one case from the secret war in Pakistan. This is quite a harrowing image for which I apologize. A lot of dead people here. Tell it briefly, back in 2006, powerful Taliban faction was about to sign a peace deal with the Pakistan government. If the peace deal had gone ahead, it would have meant that thousands of Taliban fighters would have then been free to go across the border and join the growing insurgency against the United States and the Afghan government. And without a doubt, a lot of American soldiers would have died had this peace treaty gone through. There's no doubt about that. The decision was taken to prevent the treaty from ever being signed. And in a nighttime airstrike, bombs were dropped on a boys' seminary, which was actually the location for the treaty signing. Dozens of students died. Mushtaq Yousafzai, who's now a local correspondent for NBC here in the US, was one of a select group of journalists invited to this town of Punjab to witness this treaty signing between the Pakistan government and the Taliban. On the day beforehand, he visited the madrasa, and this is what he told me: I couldn't really see many men. 2 or 3 were teachers. Most of them I saw were students aged 12 to 17. Mushtaq's woken up about 2 in the morning by a colossal explosion. He rushes to the madrasa. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were many human body pieces, not a single complete body. Everything at the madrasa was shattered. Now, you'll probably remember what happened in Pakistan just a couple of years back with the Taliban's grotesque massacre of 130 school children. Really appalling if they went into a school and murdered those poor children. There was huge upheaval in the country at that attack. The death penalty was brought back. They killed hundreds in Pakistan with the death penalty since. The Pakistan army launched a merciless war on the Taliban as a consequence. The entire society was convulsed by those killings. Now imagine the effect if the US had carried out a similar massacre 10 years ago and had never admitted responsibility. How damaging would that be to US-Pakistani relations? How much would that make Pakistanis hate the United States and what it stands for, to not admit to those deaths, whether they were right or wrong? For the book, I did finally get someone to talk to me, a former, very high-ranking US intelligence official after almost a decade of silence. Did you do it? I said. It could have been us, I was told. And that's the closest we'll ever get to a yes. And these are brutal shadow wars being fought against terrorist organisations. They're tough. These are vicious people who will stop at nothing we know to kill thousands of us. These are brutal wars. And brutal things are done in our names. But I think Washington's continued refusal officially to confirm or deny any involvement in this, these are the dead kids, 61 dead children. 18 of them were 17, 18-year-olds. There was one militant, we think, who was killed in this strike. The refusal to acknowledge any of these engagements really lies at the heart of this decade-long struggle between those who think such actions require accountability and those insisting that they remain in the shadows. Which brings us back to Obama. George W. may have dabbled in drone strikes, but it's Obama who's placed targeted killing at the heart of US foreign policy. He's effectively made targeted killing a plank of US foreign policy. Beautiful photograph, that, by the way, by the official White House photographer, Ptsd Rates. And the extent to which the president has been involved in the minutiae of this war is sometimes startling. Anwar al-Awlaki, as most of you know, was a US-born preacher who ended up as a very key figure in Al-Qaeda in Yemen, one of those affiliate Al-Qaedas that sprang up with the destruction of Al-Qaeda in Pakistan, and very dangerous terrorist organisation, very capable of launching transnational terror attacks. After the eventual assassination of Osama bin Laden, Awlaki becomes public enemy number one to the Obama administration. Most wanted pictures were posted in every ground control station of every Special Forces drone mission. Everybody knew they were going to get him. Here's what a former Special Forces drone operator told me about President Obama's personal role. We got direction from some higher-ups that the president would call our ground control station and would issue the order directly to us as a crew if we needed to shoot. That's a little bit thrilling. They wanted people that were responsible, people that would follow orders if the president came to call. And as far as I was concerned, these were bad guys. So there's another really interesting thing about, presidents of the United States do not generally get involved in individual missions involving F-15s. There's something about the drone that has the ability to draw our politicians right into the action. And I think it's because it puts the politician in the cockpit, a place they've never been able to be in warfare before. And I think that's a whole other aspect of the problem. But of course, it's not just the CIA we're talking about here. There's the other secret drone war, and that's the one being carried out by JSOC. Those of you who've seen Jeremy Scale's film, he details in quite horrifically some of JSOC's excesses in the war on terror. Joint Special Operations Command, the absolute elite of American Special Forces. As I mentioned earlier, Obama massively expands the drone wars. Suddenly we're getting 10 times more strikes in Pakistan. But he also expands the wars to Yemen and Somalia, places the drones haven't carried out strikes before. And with the CIA stretched thin in Pakistan, he gives the job of killing in Yemen to JSOC. Now actually, I talk about this a lot in the book. JSOC had used drones heavily in Iraq against Al-Qaeda, but almost never to kill. JSOC didn't like killing with their drones because they preferred to capture the individuals involved and extract intelligence from them. So it turns out JSOC wasn't very good at all. It botched a lot of killing missions. And I talk in the book about the wedding of a Yemeni couple, both widow and widower marrying for the second time, and JSOC bombs their wedding convoy. They've had the wedding feast, the 17 vehicles going to the village, the new family home, and JSOC bombs the convoy because there are some Al-Qaeda suspects at the wedding. What are we doing? As the groom said, we were in a wedding, but all of a sudden it became a funeral. Why did the United States do this to us? These are the questions that people ask. These are the difficult questions we don't want to answer. Why are we doing this? And in fact, the CIA was so determined not to be associated with this particular event that it leaked that it had assumed civilians were in the convoy and had therefore suggested that the attack never went. In this age of proliferation, almost any state can now get its hands on a strategic armed drone thanks to China. And almost any non-state actor, including terrorists, will be able to field weaponized tactical off-the-shelf drones, the kind you can get from Radio Shack, to devastating effect. And as we enter this new, more unstable period of drone use, I'm increasingly concerned of which rule book will be carrying forward from the first drone age. Now, it's tempting to think that these developing nations buying drones might see the advantage of using them only on the field of battle, fully governed by the laws of war. I'm not particularly optimistic. After all, the United States has spent the last 15 years writing a very different drone rulebook. One of assassinations, denied civilian deaths, and destabilizing military actions, often regardless of the nations on whose territories they're taking part. Whose rulebook do we think North Korea will reach for? I thought I'd end, as I began, by talking about what art has to say about drones. And it's a lot in my view, although I think we also have to recognise its limitations. A couple of years back, some Pakistani creatives laid out huge posters of children affected by the CIA's drone campaign on the rooftops and fields of the tribal area. This is a beautiful, haunting image by a photographer, a friend of mine, Norbert, a Pushtun tribal man from the tribal areas of Pakistan. He's been documenting casualties of CIA strikes for many years. The CIA deals with this by calling him a Taliban agent. He's not. He's a very interesting man. This is a girl, she's taken from, there's actually, in the original picture, she's with her brother and sister. She's holding a fragment of the missile that killed her parents and two of her siblings. She doesn't yet realise in this moment that she's an orphan. It's a shocking picture. So these Pakistani artists, the idea was to not only draw attention to the secret war, but also they hoped so that drone operators might see the evidence of their handiwork from above and reconsider what they were doing. The thought was, what if a drone pilot flies over this village and they see this gigantic picture of a girl? You know, they had previous handiwork. And I asked the drone operator, you know, what would have been the effect if you'd seen this from above? And they said, sure, it would have had an effect. But I also know how our commanders would have dealt with it. They'd have just ordered us to switch our cameras to infrared, where those children would simply have disappeared from view. The infrared frequency wouldn't see the picture. It would literally disappear from that vision. So I was going to end there tonight, but I thought I'd give you one last nightmare. To see without being seen, the title of the fantastic show here at the museum. Sometimes, I mean, there are no clean wars. There simply aren't. I mean, the fantasy of absolute precision that's grown up in recent years, the idea that our bombs are now so clever that they only kill the bad guys. This is all a delusion, and we're all participants in this. We all collude with this because it helps us to sleep at night. About 3 weeks ago, the United States attacked an Islamic State headquarters, as they described it, in the city of Mosul. Mosul is still under occupation by ISIL, has been now for almost 2 years. More than 2 million civilians are captive in that city, and it's been bombed more than anywhere else in our war against ISIL. and more civilians have credibly been reported killed in Mosul than anywhere else. And I thought I'd show you the reality of precision strikes. This is what we do. Precision strikes just mean our bombs get to where they want to go. This is the coalition's own propaganda video. And this terrorist headquarters you're seeing being destroyed here is Mosul University. Well, there you go. Sorry to end on such a down note, but I thought it would be worth having a look at something a little more broad than the drones and what we really mean by precision these days. Thank you very much. Well, I'd be delighted to take questions. Obviously, I paid the local fire service to come in with the sirens and particular added dramatic effect. But really, anything you'd like to ask and anything you'd like to talk. Yes, sir.
Well, since you have a unique perspective on this, could you give us some sense of, at least technologically, what is the next? I realize it's more proliferation, but I mean, in terms of the drones themselves, what's the next thing that you see coming? What's the next kind of drone or whatever? What's the next thing that's coming?
It's a really good question. I've spoken to folk at the Pentagon about this. Everyone I talk to about drones talks about where we are now is basically the Wright brothers. You know, these are biplanes. These are the really early drones. And if you think about air power today and compare that to biplanes, so the next generation of drones they're looking at is, what they're anticipating is contested airspace. So the next generation of drones, they're looking at what they call swarm technology, so lots of drones going in together, so if some get shot down, some still get through. Stealth is a big part. Most of the new drone designs are very fast, and unfortunately, one of the risks is that we start to lose some of the benefits of the current drones. The slowness of the drones is actually hugely in favour of civilians on the ground. The persistence, the ability to take our time. If the next generation of armed drones are supersonic, there's really then no difference between them and an F-16. And in fact, it may even be worse because you lose that pilot awareness. And drones, actually, I didn't really talk about this tonight, but there are big technological challenges for armed drones at the moment. So, for example, what they call the soda straw effect, very big problem for drones. If you think about it, a pilot in an aircraft, he or she, if they want to see something, they just look out of the window, or they roll their aircraft, or they go down, or a drone can literally only see what the camera shows, and they call it the soda straw because it's a tiny thing, and where the straw points is all you can see. So drones are really problematic in certain environments. We don't like using drones in cities and towns, for example. Why? Because they may be about to take a strike at this end of the street, and they can't see the school bus at the other end of the street. It's that much of a sort of narrow perspective. So the smart one at the moment is next generation armed drones, much faster, much stealthier, moving in swarms. So it's going to look very different 10, 15 years from now.
What about size? Smaller, bigger?
They'll be everything. They'll go from the microscopic to the vast. I mean, they will, you know, and we're not just talking aerial warfare, we're talking ground warfare, we're talking naval warfare, we're talking undersea warfare as well. We are at the very beginning of a phenomenal revolution here in warfare. And of course that brings all sorts of challenges as well. You know, distance is how we fight our wars now. Our soldiers don't die in wars anymore, really. We've killed 25,000 Islamic State terrorists for a cost of 2 American service personnel. That's changing the equation. That's also changing our relationship with the military compact. We grant military certain privileges in our society because they're prepared to die for us. And that's a deep-seated and long-lasting compact that goes back generations. If we live in a world where terrorists lash out at civilian populations now, which, for example, Islamic State or Al-Qaeda do because they can't reach our militaries anymore, that actually starts to fundamentally change the very relationship within societies between militaries and civilians. If we become the war dead and our militaries no longer pay a price, that's a very complicated shift in the equation, and I think drones are contributing to that. Sorry, I went slightly off your question, sir. Yes?
Is there any attempt in like the UN or the global community to create some kind of legislation regarding the way drone warfare is conducted?
There are some attempts around it. Generally, when you talk to folk at the UN, and most countries, by the way, and it's still most countries, believe that the CIA strikes beyond the battlefield are generally unlawful in international law. It's the general view, and it's the general consensus of the UN. So the US is still very much in the minority here. There's only 3 countries that carried out these killings away from the battlefield formally, as it were. Israel, the United States, and very recently the UK. So it's a minority view. When you speak to international lawyers, they generally say, hang on, we don't need new laws here. We just need to follow the law. And you know, the drone should follow the law should not follow the drone, to quote Christoph Haynes, who's the UN Special Rapporteur on targeted killings. So I think, yes, there are moves to kind of codify it more, but generally among international lawyers, the view is we already have the laws, we just need to respect them. Yes, sir.
You told us that we have never acknowledged any of the civilian casualties over these past 15 years. But given the ill will that it's creating and the other kinds of adverse consequences, what do you think our government and our military and CIA, what's their calculation? Why do they think it's best for them to refuse to admit any of this? What are the pros and cons that they weigh?
It's a really good question. I think it's mostly about the structure of the CIA itself and the problems around acknowledging a secret organization carrying out strikes. I think that's the heart of it. In Afghanistan, you know, I'm not saying, by the way, that you know, so if you accept the American view that these strikes are lawful in Pakistan, I'm not even saying that the killing of these civilians is unlawful. And many people, I've been to South Waziristan, the Pakistan army took me in there. I sat down with villages in places that had been bombed by the CIA. They were not particularly angry with the United States any more than they were angry with everybody else. You know. That what burns them, what angers them, is the refusal to acknowledge and accept responsibility. Can you imagine? Major airstrike on the territory of the United States and nobody admits it. Nobody admits it. How that would grate on your community. And you know, the people of the tribal areas are mostly civilians. They don't want the Taliban there. They don't want Al-Qaeda there. They don't want the Pakistan army there. They don't want anyone, actually. They're quite independent individuals, to put it mildly. So how do we do it in Afghanistan? We acknowledge the deaths. We had no fault compensation. We put up our hands and said, yes, we're very sorry we accidentally killed you. Here's $40,000. It's not going to bring back your loved one, but you know, at least it's something. Why are there different rules in Pakistan? I don't understand that. Why can we kill civilians without accountability on one side of a line on a map and accept responsibility for our actions on the other side? It's the same damn war. That's the best answer I can give, I'm afraid. Not very good. Yes, sir.
Like in Mad Magazine, you've got spy versus spy. Is there going to be drone versus drone?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. There was a piece of footage I was going to include tonight, but there was. You're lucky you didn't get the Redux version, which ran to about 3 hours tonight. But the Russians very cheekily put out a piece of footage about 6 months ago, which was one of their drones stalking an American predator above Syria. It's quite disturbing, actually. It was literally a Russian drone stalking an American drone. An official video release from the Russian military. Yes is the answer. There will be drone-on-drone wars. At the moment, again, back to this first generation of drones, they're very primitive, these aircraft. When Russia and Georgia had a brief war a couple of years back, both sides lost their drones within the first half hour. Bang, gone. You know, we use our drones in uncontested airspace. If they go up against an air force, if they go up against ground defences, they're gone. But yes, of course, all nations are anticipating drone-on-drone warfare, and that's very, very interesting. And of course, that's where all the pressure for autonomy comes in, and that's really very dangerous. And I would say, by the way, that's where we do need laws. We need specific laws outlawing autonomous drones. You know, drones that take kill decisions independent of human input. Why do they want killer drones to be autonomous? Because they need to make those split-second, microsecond decisions when they're fighting other autonomous aircraft. But then you're basically telling those drones that they can kill so long as they fulfill certain parameters. And they can kill very, very efficiently. I think we should all be extremely worried about autonomous remote weapons. Yes?
Would the drone have self-interest that way?
Well, self-awareness, that's a whole other issue. I mean, there's a very good spoof Twitter feed called Drunken Predator Drone, which is worth having a look at, which is this confessional drone that occasionally kind of coughs up to certain crimes. I mean, I don't know. I mean, kind of machine awareness is sort of a bit beyond my knowledge base. Yes.
Is there any regulation or legislation that can be made to prohibit the sale of drones to proliferation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say actually there was pretty good control until very recently. So basically, because only the US and Israel could make these things, and neither country had any interest in losing their asymmetric battlefield advantage, they just didn't sell them to anyone. And believe me, America's allies and not so allies have been banging on the door for 15 years saying, sell us your drones, sell us your drones, sell us your drones. And America has refused, and Israel has refused. So so actually that's worked very effectively, and we haven't seen proliferation. What's messed up everything now is China. China has basically come in, it's created a sort of, it did its own rip-off version of the Reaper. We call our drones killer names like Predator and Reaper and Avenger, and the Chinese call their killer drones Rainbow. Which I think, being killed by a rainbow or a Reaper, I'm not really sure really kind of which is worse. So the Chinese have created these, they're very good, and they're selling them to anyone who wants them.
So how did they get the technology?
Well, one, China is technologically a very advanced nation. Two, it, I'm sure, acquired various American drones over the years through places like...
So could France or Germany, I mean, they're technological.
Well, the interesting thing is, of course, this has actually put America's allies in a real bind at the moment, because they can't go to China and buy off the shelf, and they've been waiting.
But they're technologically advanced.
No, they're not.
Enough.
Because what you need for drone warfare is more than just the technology for the drones themselves. Drones are two weapon systems in one. One is the drone, with the weapons and the persistence and the satellite control and the other. The other part of it is the whole intelligence machinery that goes there, military-grade satellites. You've got to be really, really technologically sophisticated to do this. France could build this from scratch. It costed a fortune. I think the French, like the British, have taken the view, well, we could just buy it off the shelf from America, but America hasn't wanted to sell it. I think all of that will go now. I think we'll see American companies competing with Chinese companies to sell these damn things to everybody. So proliferation is upon us. We cannot stop it now. And that's, as I say, that's just strategic drones. The tactical stuff, the terrorists already have it. So we've lost any chance to control this now, if we ever have a chance.
So, and what is the range of these things? Like, can they send one over the Pacific from China to
No.
the US?
No, not at the moment. And in a sense, why would they? I mean, China has long-range bombers, but it doesn't generally send them to California. So, I mean, even if it had long-range drones, it's about intent rather than the weapon itself. The threat within the United States is not from strategic drones. The threat for the United States is domestic terror using off-the-shelf weaponized tactical handheld drones. That's the danger. And I'm sure that's what the FAA and FBI and others have been looking very hard at. They won't talk about it, but I think that's something we anticipate. Yes, sir.
What sort of ethical precedents do you think are set by these use of drones and how we use it specifically? Do you think there's any racism involved in this non-acknowledgement of citizens, or?
Yeah, I mean it is a sort of dark truth of drone strikes that 99% of the people they've killed are Muslims. I mean, I don't know how comfortable we'd be with a weapon that only killed Christians or only killed Jews or only killed Hindus. And it is simply a reflection, if you like, of the wars we've been fighting since 9/11, but everybody we kill with the drones is a Muslim. Everybody. And I think that we should at least think about that. The implications and also how that might be perceived and reflected back at us. But in terms of the ethics, you're saying in terms of the...
So just the very fact that we label people as militants unless they're proven explicitly to not be militants, or the fact that a lot of our drone strikes are predicated upon this logic of preemption, that we assume that they're going to attack us.
Yes.
What sort of further international implications do you think that those might have?
I think it does. I think drones have absolutely lowered the threshold for war, absolutely, without a doubt. And I think that's deeply troubling. I think it's very, very interesting that President Obama the other day in his CNN interview says that of his entire 8 years in power, what does he regret most? Libya, 2011. What was Libya? It was this air-only war where we were told, hey, we can just do this all from the air, we don't have to put ground troops in. And look at the basket case that Libya is today. And by the way, we're about to go back and do it all over again without having learned any of the lessons just from 5 years ago. We've convinced ourselves that these weapons only kill bad guys, that there's no risk, that our soldiers are out of harm's way, that, but actually what we need here is just some rigorous assessment that says, we need some pros and cons on the table here. Are we safer? Are we less safe? Are they working? Are they not working? And we just have to cut through their spin and be a little bit more rigorous in challenging some of this stuff, I think, and ask, is it really delivering a safer world? My personal view is no. I don't think it is, but we'll all have views on this, of course.
So we're about to do it again in Syria?
In Libya.
Oh, again in Libya?
In Libya. We're about to go back into Libya. Libya is about to become the third front in the coalition's war against Islamic State. And in fact, I've been talking with NATO this week for a piece I'm doing for a US national about whether they, even now, 5 years on, accept having killed any civilians 5 years ago. I'm having trouble getting them to admit it. There's this sort of strange self-denial here that they can do anything bad anymore.
So what happens if we get a total regime change? What if Bernie Sanders becomes president?
Well, Bernie's spoken out in favour of the drones, Hillary's in favour of the drones, Donald's in favour of the drones.
Bernie's in favour of the drones?
He's talked about how the drones have brought benefits. I can't...
The same way you did.
Yeah.
In the small.
Yeah. It's interesting, when I was researching the book, everyone when Obama first really racked up the drone strikes, everyone said, we couldn't have seen this coming. And I wasn't sure about that. And I went back and I read every single one of Obama's stump speeches in 2008. 30 times on the road, on the campaign trail, Obama said, I'm going to take the war to Pakistan. He told us he was going to do it, we just didn't listen. So Hillary's very clear. I don't think we'll see any change in policy. Trump, Cruz, no change, probably worse. Trump seems to think we need to go and kill the wives and children of terrorists, which is an out-and-out war crime, by the way. It is absolutely forbidden by the Geneva Conventions. Bernie, I don't know. This is the dilemma for an American president.
He doesn't want to go to war, so.
Yeah. And yet, well, Jimmy Carter managed that, I suppose. Only American president in the 20th and 21st century not to take the United States to war. Not the most popular man because of other reasons as well. Sorry, I'm now straying into American politics and I need to desperately get out of that. So, any other questions, please? Yes, sir.
Given the paradigm shift of war generally from fighting countries to now fighting terrorist organizations, and given the fact that they often hide and live in the midst of civilian populations, what alternatives do we have that would prevent civilian death more than drones?
There's a really good question.
Boots on the ground seem to be the only other way, right?
Well, I do think there's a possible third way. And it's a bit old-fashioned, but so you're absolutely right. Conflict these days is defined by combatants in civilian environments and not in uniform anymore. States versus state conflicts are really rare these days. The International Committee for the Red Cross actually had to create a new term for this a few years back, the civilian combatant. And that's to get our head around the fact that if you're in Al-Qaeda or the Taliban or ISIL, you're a combatant, but you are in law a civilian as well. And that's why, as a journalist, I usually am very careful in my language about talking about civilian non-combatants. Yes, this is a big challenge for us, and yes, militarily this pushes us into very fraught territory, and this is why precision, relative precision, can make a big difference. I'd rather we were using Hellfires than 2,000 pounders or B-52s. It's got better. It has got a lot better. But there's a third option. What did we do before the drones? We arrested people. We didn't kill them. We arrested them. Al-Qaeda was wound up in the cities of Pakistan not by assassination, not by drone strikes, but by the FBI, the CIA, Pakistani intelligence kicking in doors and arresting people and carting them off to prison. Unfortunately, a lot of those people ended up in prisons where they got tortured, and we know what came from that. And one of the reasons the drone strikes became popular is because we didn't want to imprison them anymore. What we don't really talk about is, can we go back to imprisoning where possible and not torturing? That's a conversation we need to be having, because, otherwise it's just constant violence begets violence begets violence, would be my concern. But more generally, yes, conflicts are taking place in civilian areas now. That's a sort of terrible reality where we are. And we saw the real difference between precision strikes by the US and Russian indiscriminate strikes. We've just seen that play out in Syria. There is a lot to be said for the not only the precision weapons, but the value that the US military undoubtedly places on civilian lives in war. And they can lawfully kill those civilians, they just would rather not, and I think that's a very good thing. So, in the dark blue shade, yeah.
I was wondering, how do the rates of suicide and PTSD and drone pilots compare to other members of the military?
That's a great question. PTSD is not a good marker for stress among drone operators, analysts and operators. So I did a lot on this in my book, and in fact there's a whole chapter on this in the book. PTSD rates among drone operators are slightly lower than the background PTSD rate among the general US population. About 4% of Americans at any one time are suffering from PTSD or equivalent. And among drone operators it's slightly lower than that. But that doesn't mean they don't have a big problem. The problem the drone operators have is a cluster of problems of which battlefield stress is just a part of it. Lots of psychological tensions and traumas. And it turns out the biggest one of all was one that the Air Force would think, or used to think, was going to be the biggest advantages of remote air warfare. That basically you go, you 9 to 5 the job, you go in, you kill some bad guys, you go home to the wife, to the husband, to the kids, and you get to have the best of both worlds. It turned out to be the worst of both worlds. And drone operators do not like remote warfare. The Government Accountability Office did a study just 2 years ago, 10 separate drone pilot cohorts, and every single one of them said, please don't have us stay with our families, send us to war. And the reason for that is in combat, troops get to decompress at the end of the day. They get to share, they get to continually relive the experience until they don't need to anymore. There's camaraderie, but also crucially, they're on a tour. 6 months, 1 year, they go home. Drone operators are home, and they're on the job 2 years, 3 years running, and they can't decompress because they go home at night. You are not going to sit around that table at night with your family and talk about the awful things you've done at work. So what's happened is the operators, they've bottled all of this up, and it's caused a lot of them an awful lot of damage. And the Air Force cannot hold on to the pilots and operators at the moment. It's having to pay them huge sums of money just to stay. That no matter how fast the Air Force trains the operators, more are leaving than they're training every year. So there's a crisis, but it's not exactly PTSD. In fact, the chief US Air Force psychologist is working on a new definition, which is it's virtual combat something. I can't remember. They're trying to. They think they need a whole new term for this remote warfare strength. Well, I think I'm being signalled out. I think I've gone quite a lot over time. So thank you very much, everyone, for your patience.